Beginning of the second semester of Citizens of the World on Common Ground. Our two fine speakers today, Robert Eyler from the Department of Economics and Robert McNamara from the Department of Political Science, will be talking to us about politics and economics in Central and South America. So let's thank them. And thank you all for coming.
I think primarily we're going to be focusing on South America, is that right?
I believe so, yeah. Because I think next week is Central.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, very good. Just to clarify. Okay, I'm going to start, and I'm just going to get kind of an overview. I'm not, in particular, an expert on South America. I own a business that imports products from South America, so I have a little bit of on-the-ground knowledge about how business works down there and a lot of the pitfalls in running a business that's located in Argentina in specific. But I'm going to take more of a macro view as well, because that'll lead better into what Robert's going to say after me. And so just to get started, if you think about the economy of South America, one of the problems and sort of one of the good things about it is a nice large mix of primary products. So if you look at the actual the goods that come out of South America, a lot of it's agriculture, it's oil, it's labor-based products. The capital has been flowing in there slowly over time and has ramped up in specific countries, but not in all those countries. And a lot of that is because there's a lot of fear over doing foreign direct investment because of political corruption, a lack of a tax base, a lack of political stability, and that has been a constant problem. For example, in Argentina, the post-tequila crisis left or made it look like that Argentina was going to be a really good place to start sending foreign capital, and it did start to move in. And of course, in 2001, there was almost another crisis of the same magnitude. In fact, you could say it was even worse because it was more centered on Argentina in specific. And foreign direct investment has been very up and down since then in Argentina in specific. So if you look at that, and then you look at the sort of what I would consider to be the more isolated or landlocked portion of South America, there's a completely different mix of population there, where you're talking about indigenous tribes and European descendant people. And so how those labor markets react to each other also leads to a lot of conflict and a lot of strange decision making, I guess, versus what you see in the Northern Hemisphere, especially in Western Europe and the United States. So the hope is that one of these days South America will rise as has happened in Asia, because they have a solid labor core, and it's just more of a skill-based and infrastructure, and as far as I'm concerned, that would help that out. And so the question I ask is, can markets help? Because in many cases, if you look at the history of South America, market economies have kind of come and gone depending on how the people have reacted politically. Sometimes you see a coup and it goes back to a nationalized, militarized situation, and other times markets have reigned. So the history does not tell us too much about whether it's helped South American economies to have more of a market socialist economy. The attempts to grow, if you look at the major attempts, post-war Argentina initially was, after Second World War, was really the fourth largest economy in terms of resource base. This is what economists claim is true, 1945. And however, in the late 1940s, it slid off the map, literally and figuratively, because the infrastructure was never built to support that economy, and moreover, the politics were not there to really take advantage of it. In Brazil, the beauty of Brazil from a labor standpoint is there's a lot of labor. If you think about it as as analogous to a place like China or India, as far as what labor exists, Brazil looks like a great place to land a business, use cheap labor, and start to export products from Brazil. But again, it suffers the same fate as many other countries in South America. It just does not have the political infrastructure or the market infrastructure long term to see a lot of foreign direct investment and take advantage of that labor. Chile and Venezuela, in contrast, are kind of two completely different economies, but both the major stars right now in South America economically. Venezuela because of oil, and because it's taking full advantage of the current oil situation. In Chile because they have become more reformed and look more at market forces to drive their economy, rather than sort of a wild mix of a military government, super socialized industries, and in many cases nationalized industries. So whether those two are two different models for other South American countries or not is hard to say. I'll talk a little bit about them in a bit, and I'm sure Robert will talk about the politics involved there more. But that's sort of the larger economies and the major focus, I think, from this point forward will be Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and Venezuela. So just to start briefly, Chile and Venezuela, if you think about it, Chile, because of those market reforms, now have opened themselves up to free trade agreements with the U.S. in ways that would actually break down old barriers. Obviously, copper has been the historic exported good from Chile, and it really drove their economy and subsidized bad governments for a long, long period of time because they dominated the copper markets. And now, if you go to the grocery store, for example, you'll see in our winter, many, many products that you see that you would not normally see in the winter are from Chile, including avocados, oranges, etc. And there's a lot of agricultural goods that are coming out of Chile when we don't have them. So it's really good to have an economy that is in South America that's willing to trade and has the ability to do so and take advantage of their populace. Because basically what's happening there is Chile's gained a comparative advantage by the fact that their labor costs are lower and they're beating Australia and New Zealand, who may also have similar crops, in sending those things to the United States. Venezuela, it's just basically a game of oil. I don't think there's a whole lot of Americans traveling to Venezuela and taking advantage of its tropical location lately, but obviously the oil is able to fuel the leadership in Venezuela to basically do whatever they want. I wouldn't say it's similar to North Korea, because North Korea really does not have an indigenous industry that pumps money into the economy, but I think that the same sort of, I wouldn't say megalomania exists, but it's a lot easier to be a megalomaniac when you have a lot of money coming in versus being constantly isolated from the rest of the world economy, as in the case of North Korea. So whether or not that will continue in Venezuela is kind of a function of two things: how long world politics will allow it to happen, and two, how long the oil price stays nice and high to fuel the profits and thus fuel the government spending of that regime. Colombia, to me, if you look at the countries in South America, is the biggest question mark. They have a relatively large populace. They are relatively geographically closer to the Northern Hemisphere, so they don't suffer the same distance issues as places like Chile and Argentina and Uruguay. But they have also a history of really bad politics and a lack of stability. However, one of the biggest problems in economics that we're going to have to face at some point down the road is how do you deal with a major underground element to your economy? How large the coca trade is, ultimately for Colombia, is what may fuel their ability to import goods from the United States. And so if you look at the Colombian wealth, you assume that Colombian wealth is somewhat built and protected by the coca trade, then the ability to export goods to Colombia must be based on that underground economy. So whether people morally want to measure such economic flows or not, it's an economic reality in a place like Colombia that a lot of spending takes place because of the profits that are made simply by selling cocaine. And that's, if people kind of wash their hands, I don't want to talk about that kind of thing, it's a reality. And so that fuels the politics, it fuels the military decision making, it also fuels a lot of the trade decision making because it fuels the incomes that are made in some cases. Now, Colombia is going through a lot of long-term, slow reforms on both the internal and external protection side, both in trade and policing the drug trade. But while it still exists, it has to be taken into account. So I think Colombia is sort of that dark horse in South America that, if it reforms well, could be another major country like Chile or Argentina that's just sitting there really waiting to explode economically. In the remainder, it's relatively smaller, it's relatively ag-based, and one of the biggest issues in economics down in South America is whether or not, because of inflation problems historically, it's a good thing to dollarize as Ecuador has dollarized. Is that a good thing long-term for these economies? And it's a huge debate in economics, and there's really no good answers yet, because the way that the theory works, when you dollarize, you suddenly open yourself up to the economic shocks of the United States concerning your currency value and your ability to both export and import. And at the same time, you're doing that because you're trying to find stability where it otherwise would not be if you were continuing to print the real. So in Ecuador's case, they abandoned their old currency and went to the dollar because they wanted trade stability with the United States in specific. And it's just like fixing your currency. They just happen to go full dollarization, and they're using dollars openly. Whether or not that's good for places like Brazil, for example, is extremely hard. I can't imagine it would be, because Brazil is a much larger economic powerhouse.
Is it possible for a country, instead of fixing their economy to the dollar, fix it to the euro?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Yeah, and I think that the only reason why Ecuador has dollarized and hasn't euroized, if you want to put it that way, is because of the trade flows. If they started to trade more and more with the Western Europe, it'd be more likely that they would look to make the switch. Much like the Chinese, for example, pegged the renminbi to the dollar for a long time, and now have pegged it to a basket of currencies because their trade flows have switched over time. So that's really what you see dollarized economies because of that, because of the trade flows. It makes it easier and more stable, I should say. And that, of course, leads to the inflation question and the politics that come from that. And so, in general, economists see inflation as really the byproduct of bad monetary policies. But in general, bad monetary policies come from bad fiscal policies. So as governments spend more and more money and ramp up the demand for goods and services, they ramp up inflation, and the easiest way to pay off your debts is to print money, especially if your tax base doesn't exist. And I don't know how many of you have lived in South America, specifically in Argentina, but if you've lived in Argentina, you may know that it's very difficult for the Argentinian government to collect taxes. The culture just doesn't exist for it, if you can imagine that. So government spends as any other government would, and historically they've printed money to pay off their debts or tried to sell debt certificates on the world market. But as your currency is being used to pay off your debts and you don't really have a tax base, it makes your debt less saleable, and that ramps up inflation even more. So the accommodation, if you want to put it that way, of both fiscal and monetary policies rising is really historically why we've seen so much inflation in South America. Their inability to collect taxes on a regular basis, or to have the culture and the politics that say, okay, we're in power now, we need to get rid of this debt, guess what, we need to pay taxes. The historic solution has been to say, okay, we're going to put a military government in, we're going to nationalize industries, and we're going to now say we're no longer going to pay the debt we owe. Too bad. Come and get us if you want it. And that's left a lot of bad history as far as their ability to grow from foreign direct investment, because who could trust it? Who knows what's going to happen next? So I think one of the key reforms, and so the cure, as I say here, one of them may be just to command over government policies and debt. In other words, see fiscal policy when it is, in fact, tempered as a solution to long-term economic problems. Whether or not foreign investment will come in and be specific to infrastructure, to economic self-sufficiency, with the idea that you're going to continue to pump the profits into the economy once they're there, once the foreign investment has come in, to secure more trade flows between, for example, the United States and the specific country. In theory, that it works really well. In practice, it's had its moments. For example, South Africa is a great example of when that has gone real bad. And in fact, a lot of investment went into South Africa. South African government started to nationalize and also just take over the profits, and it fueled apartheid, and then they tried to pull out, and it just became a complete debacle. So the other possible solution, as I say here at the bottom, is economic union. The Mercosur works, or has worked somewhat, but not as well as, like, for example, what's happened in the European Union. Is it possible to see South America becoming one big economic union over time? And the answer is, until they get their politics and their fiscal spending in order, it's highly unlikely that they would even get to the point where they'd have a more secure common market than they have right now, much less a trade area or a customs union, which Mercosur was meant to be. So, in conclusion, just on the economic side, and then Robert will take it from here on the political side, ultimately for the United States, thinking about looking at South America, is it good that South America develops and grows in some sustainable fashion? And the answer is absolutely. Just like any place else, it's all about trade flows. We're in the same hemisphere. As our Spanish population grows, I take that back, as our Hispanic population grows and our Spanish-speaking population grows, trading with countries that have the same language may be a networking solution to more and more trade. So I think if we face the reality that, and it's a good reality, that we're going to see more flows of people from Central and South America towards the United States, having more trade with the countries they're coming from is purely a function of the so-called network effects that take place in economics when you see migration. That can't be a bad thing, ultimately, for the United States. There are obviously good and bad, and that's classic economics, unfortunately. The caveats with all that, however, are both the fiscal and political stability of those countries. Once you establish those trade flows, will they stick around? If you invest in those countries, will you lose those investments? And once you lose them, as history dictates, will the investment come back after political stability has at least seems to be back in place? In South America, ultimately, that is their major problem, is that the political and economic stability has just not been there and it keeps a lot of foreign investment from going in and going in hard. Chile now is probably the best example of foreign investment going in and going in to stay, because the market reforms are now in a long-term setting and not a short-term project of market economics, whether or not it's going to work. It seems to be working, and more money is likely to go into Chile, and so that to me is the major example of what to do down there. But Chile is is not the typical economy in South America, and that's why I think it's going to be tricky. So anyway, that's the economic overview from me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to now look at some of the politics of this. Can everybody hear me? We don't have to use this? Good. And what I want to look at is the new left in Latin America, and maybe some of the problems with using labels like left. So first of all, let me start by outlining a couple factors that I think that have contributed to this new left in Latin America. And the first one is the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991 and the ending of the Cold War, because what this would do is it would give greater credibility to those left-of-center parties in the region, and they no longer would be claimed to be stooges of the Soviet Union. At least Washington couldn't claim that they were stooges of the Soviet Union. They now existed in their own right, and their agendas could no longer be dismissed as proxies for the Soviet Union. So that's the first factor. And the other is I guess what I would call the deep-seated socioeconomic problems in the region, some of what Robert has already addressed. Those problems, those sentiments have remained in spite of the Washington consensus, if you will, that's come out of this country. For those of you who aren't familiar with the term Washington consensus, that basically was promoted in the 1990s as a result of the debt crisis, the international debt crisis, which greatly impacted Latin America. And it called for open trade, economic restructuring, structural adjustment programs, neoliberalism, etc. And the problem is that lots of money was borrowed from the IMF and other creditors, but rather what we saw was this mismanagement that you addressed, this mismanagement of the national wealth, corrupt governments, and a growth of pervasive inequality throughout the region. And so, in fact, poverty does continue to inflict the area. Some 40% of Latin America population is considered to be poor. Neoliberal policies in Argentina that you talked about came crashing down in 2001 as the economy collapsed. Government went through some 5 presidents in almost as many days, if I remember correctly. You have Brazil, just a couple examples here, where approximately 2/3 of the land is owned by roughly 3% of the population. Bolivia, where you had a water privatization program, Bechtel, in 2000 resulted in a 300% increase in the cost of water at the time. So those were part of the discontent that was going on in the region that, if you will, opened the door for the new left. And then the other is some democratic reforms that did happen. Opened up political participation to previously marginalized groups, and I would say particularly indigenous groups. And this is probably best witnessed by the election of Evo Morales in Bolivia. And then you saw with this new enfranchisement of these groups, you saw some presidents being forced to actually resign. And it did happen in Ecuador, it did happen in Bolivia. And so as such, we see what some have called Latin America, quote, turning to the left. And a few examples: Chile, Michelle Bachelet, Socialist Party. Bolivia, I mentioned Evo Morales and his movement towards socialism. It's really a conglomeration of social movements and labor unions. Tabaré Vázquez in Uruguay. Brazil, Lula da Silva, as he goes by, of the Workers' Party. Argentina, Nestor Kirchner. most famously Hugo Chavez, who we seem to hear the most about, in Venezuela, and most recently, Daniel Ortega. Some of us remember, of course, from the Sandinista party and the former leftist president in the 1980s. Well, what I think is that when we go beyond the general label of left, which might be maybe useful for Washington's objectives to demonize a lot of these parties or people. Some of them don't really have parties associated with them. But I think when we go beyond that, we see it's a bit more complicated picture, which emerges and tells us something about what's going on in Latin America today. Now, it's true that political parties and individuals, some of them I would call populists, I'll address that later, and traditionally associated with the Cold War left and have greater concern for social equality, many more of them are now heading Latin American governments. But I think it's also true that these parties, these movements, these populist leaders actually have rather diverse agendas, and they've got diverse policies. And some of them actually are seriously challenging our traditional notions of democracy. And again, Venezuela is the one that's usually most mentioned there. But when you look at it, it might render the term left meaningless when it comes to a more serious analysis of Latin American politics. So Cuba aside, I'm going to set Cuba aside here and look at a couple examples here. Chile. We've heard about Chile and the economic reforms. Michelle Bachelet comes from Chile's Socialist Party, as well as the former president, Ricardo Lagos. And their left-wing party has governed in an alliance with the Christian Democrats for close to, I want to say, about 17 consecutive years. Lagos was the first socialist president since Allende in 1973, and he was elected in a runoff in the year 2000. And in fact, the Socialist Alliance has focused on reductions in poverty, some success, as well as improvements in housing, education. But most of that socialist agenda has been aided by a strong commodity market for copper, which has allowed it. Because at the same time, Chile's economic policies under the socialists, including Bachelet, the current president, have been decidedly orthodox neoliberal. They include free trade agreement with the United States in 2003. And so here you see a case where the market's been adopted by a socialist left government as its engine for economic growth, with some impressive performance. But the fact is, and you can comment on this better than I, but from what I've seen, only a slight drop in the inequality between the haves and the have-nots in Chile. I should say to their credit, though, at least none of this has really been at the expense of democracy. And if anything, the movements against the legacy of the dictator Pinochet have seen some significant progress, I would say, under the socialists. Now Brazil, also in the camp of a moderate left, although Lula did not run as many, and there were many presidential campaigns as head of the Worker Party, he did not run as a moderate. He was raised in poverty and ended up becoming a union leader. He was recently reelected in 2006, and largely due to his popularity with the poor and as a result of his program Zero Hunger. Zero Hunger. He also has another one called Bolsa Familia, which means the family fund. It's an initiative. And he's been involved in some extensive land reform programs. But once he wasn't in power, beginning in 2002, Lula clearly is governed as a centrist, okay? And to the surprise of many international financiers, a lot of them went scrambling after he was elected, and we're sorry they sold their stock. So in 2006, you could say Lula clearly had the support of Washington and the Washington Consensus, as well as international investors, as well as the poor, who still see him making some efforts in dealing with poverty and income inequalities. Now, His critics will say that they're superficial for the most part and not lasting. But at least you are beginning to see in their recent history the inequalities between the have and have not, and it's one of the greatest in the Western Hemisphere, if not in the world. You are beginning to see that come down for the first time. But Lula's centrist policies have raised the ire of many, including in his own Workers' Party. Some of them have chose to rebel, and he's been pretty vicious in expelling them from the party. And so, in fact, he sparked a little mini civil war within his party. At the same time, Lula's confronted the United States, and it's confronted the United States in its own protectionist agricultural policies, which hurt Brazilian exports, criticizing the Bush administration for not playing fair in the capitalist game of trade, open trade. For those of you who aren't aware, the United States spends approximately $20 billion a year to subsidize agribusiness in this country. Huge bone of contention between Brazil and the United States. Argentina is somewhat of a unique case in that Nestor Kirchner came into the presidency in the midst of this huge economic political upheaval. Considered somewhat less moderate of a leftist, Kirchner is a Peronist, but he does keep company with leftists. He's famous for his thumbing his nose at the IMF, and he does have the privilege of doing this because Chavez has been helping him out, buying Argentinian bonds, thus allowing Argentina to pay off a good part of its debt. But still, the economic recovery program has included a good dose of government intervention, particularly as it relates to price controls. I spent the break in Argentina, and the big deal going on there was that the restaurants and the markets couldn't buy beef because the cattle growers are saying we're not going to. It's not profitable for us anymore to raise cattle because Kirchner, because of inflation, all right, and it's serious. They say it's at 9%, but I think they cooked the books a bit to keep it from the double digits. And so he's got a heavy dose of government intervention there. The other, Bolivia, now, even further to the left, with the recent election of Evo Morales, indigenous leader of cocoa farmers, he was elected overwhelmingly in 2005. Heads the movement towards socialism. Bolivia's first indigenous president in the, I want to say some 180 years of independence. I'm looking to our historian here. Bolivia is among the poorest of South American countries. The majority of the indigenous people, of course, have borne the brunt of this crushing poverty. Hence, the democratic possibilities meant that a campaign for more economic justice and a check on the traditional elite, many of them in the eastern province of Bolivia and Santa Cruz, it meant that they were going to at least have a voice here, and that voice carried forth in electing Evo Morales. And so in many respects, Morales became the poster child for the left in Latin America following his 2005 victory. As Venezuela has had some help with his leftist agenda. Bolivia has the second largest reserves of natural gas after Venezuela. It's helped him to finance his policies. But still, the state's interjection into the natural gas industry has caused rumbles, of course, among international investors, but including his leftist colleague Lula, because Lula is concerned about about $1.5 billion invested in Bolivia's natural gas industry. So you're seeing some squabbling amongst the leftists there. Morales is also aware that the United States is Bolivia's largest single donor. And if it ever hopes to join Mercosur, the South American trading bloc that Robert mentioned, it's probably going to have to tame its economic policy somewhat. And most recently, Morales decided not to go ahead with the nationalization of the mining sector. Well, some have suggested that Morales, like Chavez in Venezuela, he's more of a populist than a leftist because he's using the country's natural resources to buy the political support he needs to stay in office. And Morales is an Aymara Indian. They're the primary benefactors of his policies, as well as some of the Quechua. Other indigenous peoples are not, primarily those who happen to be in the eastern province of Bolivia and the Santa Cruz province. And so that's why some are saying he's not the leftist that he should be if he was really concerned of a broad spectrum of indigenous peoples in Bolivia. Briefly, just to include Central America here, Daniel Ortega, it's hard to leave him out of this discussion. He was just recently elected, I'll say, and following his socialist government of the 1980s, infamous government. But interestingly, what I would say, I think in his heart he's a leftist, okay? And he did recently announce education for everyone. But he has clearly become a pragmatist and a real politician. Part of his pragmatism was to strike a deal to get the Catholic Church on his side, saying yes, he will support abolishing, making abortion illegal, including when a woman's life is in danger or in the case of rape. The other is that he has said he will support CAFTA, the Central American Free Trade Agreement, and Nicaragua is in that. He's actually even named a former Contra soldier as his vice president, and the Contras were the Contrarrevolucionarios, of course, who were being funded by the United States to overthrow the Sandinista government. So let's say he's changed his stripes a bit, and he's a pragmatist there. And then finally here, Venezuela. In Venezuela, Hugo Chavez, reelected this past December with some 60% of the vote, thus consolidating his power. If he rules like an autocrat, as many in Washington claim, he seems to be doing it with the consent of a substantial majority of the population at the moment. Formally, Venezuela ruled by corrupt officials, which you mentioned, for decades, if not longer. Venezuelan poor, they've looked to Chavez and his Bolivarian socialist revolution to be their savior. In the 1980s, 1990s, again due to the debt crisis, Venezuela's economy dropped by some 40%. Today, thanks largely to the windfall oil revenues and huge increase in public spending since he first came into office in 1999, Chavez, he's overseen, and granted these are government statistics, okay, from Venezuela I'm going to mention. They're disputable, but nevertheless, I'm going to use them. An overall fall in poverty from 42% in 1999 to roughly, figures I have, between 35 and 38% in 2008. Unemployment has fallen from around 20% in 2003 to roughly 10% in 2006. Not surprising with his infusion, growth of the economy. There's been, according to some figures, a 43% rise in income for the poorest social class in Venezuela. Fees for public schools have been eliminated. Subsidized food is now being served in community kitchens. And through the famous Oil for Services program that Venezuela has enacted with Cuba, Venezuela sells oil to Cuba at a favorable exchange rate, and Cuban dollars are now offering medical care to Venezuelans that otherwise would not be having any care. So I would say, while the jury's still out on the actual sustainability, which is important, the sustainability of Chavez's socialist revolution, I think that you could say that they are considered leftist policies. And you need to add to that his recent nationalization of the public utilities, his move towards Petróleos de Venezuela, more state intervention, et cetera, et cetera. But still, there's another side to all of this. Arguably, Chavez could be considered more of a populist than a leftist. Some have gone so far to just call him a Juan Perón with oil. Okay, not coincidentally, many of the populists in Latin America before Chavez have also come from the military. I'm thinking of Juan Perón from Argentina, Getulio Vargas. of Brazil, Lázaro Cárdenas, Mexico. And part of this is the appeal of the military caudillo, the military strongman, one who promises to deliver for the masses, and historically have been exploited by the ruling elite. But the other characteristic of a populace is that they tend to despise dissent. Okay, you're with them or you're against them, and hence democracy is often pushed to the sidelines. Now, Perón was often labeled as a fascist, and in fact he did go into exile for some 18 years under Franco's Spain. Today, Chavez has consolidated his power to the extent where there is virtually no opposition in any of the 23 states. The judiciary is under control. The legislature is under control. A lot of that is, though, is because the opposition boycotted the elections, the legislative elections. Opposition media recently, we've seen their licenses not being renewed, and most recently, the Chavez-controlled National Assembly just gave him the mandate to tighten his political grip and rule by presidential decree for the next 18 months. And this, of course, is a measure to promote the Bolivarian revolution without any checks and balances. He's also been speaking of a desire to unite supporters into one party, change legislation, and which would allow him then to remain in office until the year 2020. Right now, it would be about 2013. So, Chavez, I would say an eclectic mix of authoritarianism, populism, militarism, all sustained, until recently anyway, by high oil prices. But I think that hardly captures a simple label of left, okay? So if you added to these above labels, I think you could say his anti-U.S. and anti-imperialist stance. Chavez regularly rants against the U.S., including referring to the odor left behind at the UN General Assembly after Bush spoke in the fall. Some are asking if he's going to be the new Castro. Well, Chavez clearly is using Venezuela's oil revenues to buy friends in the region and shape an anti-U.S. bloc of nations. Venezuela has recently joined Mercosur, the South American trading bloc, and he wants it to be Washington, an alternative to Washington's plan for a free trade agreement for the areas. But I think before anybody starts calling him Fidel Castro, they should keep in mind that a number of the other leftists in Latin America have different ideas. And recently there was a Mercosur meeting in Rio de Janeiro. And at that meeting, Argentina's Kirchner and Brazil's Lula both clearly said they're going to rein Chavez in. And their fear is scaring away foreign investors. And so I think he's going to have quite a more resistance there than it might look like on the surface. In addition, for all his socialist rhetoric, Chavez himself realizes that Venezuela's heavy oil needs foreign investment for refining, needs offshore. Its offshore areas need investors from Chevron or whatever. The new state-run energy telecom industries need outside companies like Hewlett-Packard, like Verizon, et cetera, et cetera. It needs markets for the oil. And then finally, while Chavez does intend to deepen his trade with non-traditional partners from more politically aligned countries like China and Iran. There are now, there's soon to be nonstop flights between Tehran and Caracas. In fact, trade with U.S. actually increased last year. U.S. exports to Venezuela grew 42% last year to a record $8 billion, and a lot don't know that. 12th largest trading partner for the United States, Venezuela. So I think then I'll finish this by saying I think it should be a warning to U.S. foreign policymakers, however, that Chavez's populist charisma and his significant oil revenue are really excellent tools for tapping into the widespread discontent which still exist in Latin America because of this persistent poverty, these economic inequalities, and this this minimally a perception of failure of the Washington consensus. So not to be so concerned about him being a leftist or not, but the fact that there's a ripe audience there for a populace of his calling. So I'll leave it at that.
Robert, how do you characterize Korea and Ecuador? I mean, I don't know much about it.
Yeah, Korea. He, he's new to the scene, so it's going to be hard to see what actually happens. But I think he's going to be more of a pragmatist. Ultimately, he campaigned on, doing away with the neoliberal policies, etc. But he too has got oil to help him, and he has said that they are going to continue to use the dollar as their currency. But I think it's too soon to say for him. Yeah. Do you have something? Do you have a view on him?
A lot of thoughts, when you retire no longer teaching, you get an audience. But no, I didn't tell it before. There's so much regionalization going on in the environment across the State Department, et cetera. I appreciate that piece in a situation. By the way, Iran and Venezuela have relations going back to the Volta. It's not something that just happened.
But never to this extent.
Oh, no, with air flights.
No, but also, okay.
And also, what I was trying to think in terms of getting a handle on looking at not just South America, but also Central America and Mexico. The election in Mexico recently seemed to be like a Mexican plebiscite on the Washington consensus versus this nationalistic populist, whether it's the PON one or called their own one, but that represented the pro-Washington consensus, and the very close election that represented essentially the rejection of the Washington consensus. So Mexico, and still obviously very divided on that economic policy. Brazil, Vargas, by the way, he's a populist certainly and a dictator, but not with a military background.
Okay, well, you're the historian, yeah. Right.
And actually, there was a military coup that brought him to power,
Yeah.
but he himself was not personally.
That's right. It was a military coup, and that, yeah, I misspoke. It was a military coup, and then the military coup eventually said, it's time for you to go, too. And his populism mostly came much later, too, when he was trying to grab the left in his second round.
Even in the 30s, and by the way, just another thing that occurs to me, when people talk about what foreign investment is.
I know, sir, there are just some people that want to talk.
But the idea is that I've read a number of different places. Brazilians or Argentines invested in their own industry, their own economy. They didn't have this huge foreign debt or debt. Very often they're going to invest General Motors or something other than Argentine Motors.
Maybe they know something that you don't.
Yeah, no, I mean they're listed there obviously. I'll stop.
No, that's exactly the point. I mean, one of the major problems in getting them to reinvest is the fact that they know their own politics better than foreign investors do.
And that should be a clear signal that if the populace is not reinvesting their own incomes back in their own country, it's too risky in their mind, and they want to get it out someplace that's more stable. Simple equation, unfortunately. Chip, go.
Yeah, two comments. One about the mentioned cooking the books in Argentina, and apparently this week Kirchner just fired his finance minister because inflation was too high. So the new finance minister came up with a new formula for calculating inflation, which was 50% lower. So.
Yeah,
that's not too bad.
They officially said it was at 9%, and they're doing everything to not make it go over to that double digit.
The other thing about Chavez's sustainability is obviously right now he doesn't have much of an organized or official opposition voice in Venezuela. But one thing that allows him to tackle if he wants to remain there for much longer is the increase in violence.
Oh, yeah.
Venezuela has a few years ago passed Brazil, and now last year passed Colombia as the country in South America with the highest rate of gun deaths. And so to pass Colombia and Brazil, you measure like that.
Yes. And if I may add to it, and it is in his own constituency where it's happening, the poor that are primarily impacted by this. Yeah. I actually have a question on since Argentina went off the dollar and talking about this inflation, what prognosis would you give them? Was that a smart thing to do or not? Or
well, they were forced off the dollar when they went off, and, and the rationale that I have read and seemed to make sense was that for every dollar that came into Argentina, they were printing a dollar. But every time you print a dollar, it recycles itself throughout the economy. No, take it back. So they would print 1 peso. So then, and that peso would circulate. So for every dollar that came in, they actually were getting about 7 or 8 pesos against a dollar where there was supposed to be an equivalent value. So the reason why Argentina went off the dollar is because the United States stripped them of that value and forced them to devalue their currency, because it sort of suppressed inflation in that sense. Did you understand what I mean by that?
Yeah.
So that was the rationale why they went off.
I didn't know that happened.
It was actually kind of shocking to me, and when I heard it, I said, that actually makes a lot of sense, because in a country that has a lot of debt, it's a very powerful thing to do to suddenly convert all your debts over to dollars, pay it off in pesos, but have that augmented value of the peso, and at the same time getting economic growth out of every dollar that comes into your economy. But it suppresses the inflation until the exchange rate reacts. Yeah. So was it a good thing or not? It was a good thing in the sense it brought economic reality to Argentina. It was a bad thing because it devastated their financial markets in the interim period. But I think that they're a better economy now because of that, and that they're watching the monetary policies a lot more closely than they have historically as a result of the 2 currency crises in 1995 and then again in 2001. So I would say it's a good thing long term. It was terrible short term. I opened my business in October 2001, and then December 2001, the currency got cut into a quarter. So that was actually it was a good thing for me, because we were buying Argentinian goods that suddenly in dollars were a quarter of their original value. Right. So that actually helped me, but that's not good for Argentinian people. No. So anyway, that's the byproduct of that, is it actually could stimulate more exportation because of that, and that's sort of the positive byproduct of having your financial markets basically ruined by that that devaluation.
Yeah, how do you tax a society? You mentioned that Argentina doesn't tax its people, and I think that's one of the, I agree that that's one of the reasons why maybe that there's not a lot of revenue going into the government.
Well, yeah, and maybe I misspoke. They tax, they just don't collect. In other words, the culture does not exist to collect the taxes as much as the tax laws exist. It's the collection of taxes that's the problem.
So they're not paying taxes.
Argentinian people just, what are you going to do about it?
So how do you start? See, the United States went into depression in the 30s, and then they recuperated, and they taxed their people and collected taxes. So if the United States could have done it after the depression, why can't the Latin American economies do it?
Well, the income tax in the United States started in 1911.
Right, but after the depression, they didn't pretty much collapse, and they had to restart all over again?
Well, but the only reason why it collapsed in the 1930s is because incomes collapsed. So what the government did instead is they started spending money and trying to generate wages. And the beauty of government spending when it happens like that is, I give you a job at Tennessee Valley Authority, you make an income, and guess what? You get them to pay federal income tax on that income. And so the government is then recycling the spending in the sense that it's providing jobs and providing consumption, but then you turn around and you have to pay federal income tax. So the actual government spending after it's all said and done is smaller than it looks like it is on the surface. And that was really the strength of the New Deal when it happened, is it boosted the economy, but also did not put the government in a large amount of real long-term debt as a result of that boost, and sort of the Keynesian policies that they took at the time.
I guess what I'm trying to say is, if the United States could have done it after the Depression, did the Latin American economies of Chile and Argentina have it any much difficult than the United States did after the Depression to not be able to do it?
Could I maybe?
Oh no, please, Robert. Yeah.
Oh well, I just one factor. I can't. I'll let him speak to the economic part. But in Latin American politics, there's something we study about political culture. Number one, and corruption is rampant. Okay, and when you look at democratic theory, you talk about legitimacy of the government, and one of the the variables for legitimacy is your ability. Do you have confidence in that government, and can you collect taxes? If you don't believe in the government, you're not going to pay taxes. So there's a lot there, but corruption is, it's widespread, and wealthy tend not to like to pay taxes.
Yeah, and actually the idea of not paying taxes is not limited to Argentina. It's
widespread, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if you go back historically, most of these countries were controlled by oligarchies whose wealth came from actually the land.
Correct.
And exporting, food, grains, stuff like that. And so they were not about to tax their source of income or tax the imports they put in that they lived on. Like that. And it's just the corruption is just rampant, it still is. I mean, Mexico has now reformed its tax system even after NAFTA and other things.
And I think the legitimacy question is exactly, it's certainly one of the major aspects of how the U.S. recovery after the Depression worked, because I think people then trusted the government again, and it just kind of stepped itself up. And again, the United States didn't lose the ability to collect taxes, most likely because that legitimacy at least was there. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it's when you had that succession of militaristic oligarchies, and then you move to a more market setting. If you don't know what's going to happen with those taxes, culturally, you have a small incentive to pay them.
Or if it's a corrupt government,
right.
You say, why should I pay taxes to this corrupt government?
Or a government that's not particularly popular is trying to tax the rich. It's not going to be in power very long.
Well, although that is Chavez right now, for better or worse, that is part of his. He says, I am going to tax the rich.
Right, and the beauty of Chavez for the time being is that he is at least funneling that money back into the populace, but again, it's fueled by what now is a historic high price of oil. If the oil price collapses, it's going to put a lot of pressure on that government to stick around with the same policies and the same spending levels, I would say.
It probably won't happen.
And that's my point, is that, and it's very easy to grandstand about how, evil the United States is when you just have money coming in by the billions every year that you didn't have before, because then, as Robert suggested, you could begin to buy a security blanket around you, and their entry into Mercosur, in a sense, could in fact be long-term positive, in that they may push to really to begin an economic union in South America to keep themselves from being enslaved on their own terms by the United States trade, because they themselves have put a blanket around them. But I don't know if that will happen or not, and a lot of it, Chavez and his ultimate goal is really hard to say at this point, besides the domination of his own country. And it's all fueled by oil, and we saw some of this in the mid 1980s as well, when Venezuela cheated on the OPEC price and gained a lot of world market share as a result of that. And even though the price of oil collapsed, their gain of market share is now showing its face through being able to take advantage of it. And as Robert said, they're still the 12th largest trading partner of the United States through that sort of bilateral movements. Anyway.
At the beginning, Robert, you talked about resource rich, like that. But with the exception of oil, that and eventually even there, I would say a dead industry in terms of long-term economic development, because the price of raw materials, with the exception of oil, have not risen as fast as manufacturing goods they're importing. So their terms of trade are declining as opposed to improving.
Unless you're Venezuela.
Oil or natural gas today.
Copper.
Yeah, copper is probably,
copper.
Chile is probably the other version of that through the copper, yeah. But, for example, Argentina is a classic case of where their terms of trade have eroded because of that situation. Yeah, absolutely. And because their currency died vis-a-vis their neighbors in the late 1990s, or in 2001, that hurt their terms of trade as well.
Yeah.
Is Chavez doing anything to diversify or develop the infrastructure in Venezuela?
To tell you the truth, I'm not sure. Do you know?
No, I think that's one of the major criticisms, but go ahead.
There was the main freeway that connects with the
collapsed.
Collapsed.
Yeah.
It was on the verge of collapse. It had to be literally closed down. I think it was a year ago.
Yep.
And it was because of failure to reinvest in this
freeway
So,
to develop the business.
No,
Now
but
they're
it's
just
the
now
main
redoing it, but
highway going outside of Caracas to the airport.
Goods that had to be imported. People couldn't get to the airport in under 12 hours.
all sorts of problems because there was no investment in the infrastructure.
And that's, in fact, one of the major criticisms of his policies is that he's much more keen on having his hegemonic control of the region and doling out money to all the others, and while the infrastructure within is collapsing. And hence, again, the long-term sustainability of the socialist revolutions in question because of that. And hence, is it really a long-term leftist plan, or is he a populist using oil?
Right, and you can generalize that across South America for the last 50 years. Their lack of investment in infrastructure has really hurt their ability to take advantage of whatever resource comparative advantages they may have had.
Right.
So anyway, I think that's it.
Well, you guys can say.
I got to go to class, so.
All right.
Thank you.